In Chemung County, in Tioga, where we have no cities, we have no hospital, we have no college or university. In Chemung County, we have a small city that was decimated by a flood in 1972, which has not recovered. Most of our towns are small and rural, and the infrastructure needs of those communities are as important as any city. Their infrastructure is degraded. Most communities have had no new building. Housing is deplorable. We're all in this together. So I hope from these conversations you realize we have to sit down and talk to each other and work together. So let's move beyond my little speech. So cooperative extension and other nonprofits, what do? For cooperative extension, we help the counties do the work that's needed to meet the needs of the community. First thing we do is identify what the needs are, and we help to address them with what resources we have. Like the communities we serve, we are fiscally stressed. I've been a director of extension now for 19 years, and the entire time I've been director, we've had no increase in state funding, decrease in federal funding, and most of our counties have had little or no increase in funding or cuts in funding from our counties. We've had little blips in there. We can say, oh, we can do this for you, we might get a little bit more. It does vary on location and the wealth of those counties. But we help address issues in agriculture and nutrition, which is no longer just traditional nutrition, but we help with the formation and functioning of farmers markets, helping increase access to local foods. Many of our counties have family development programs, which are foundational for our communities to have healthy families, so that they don't end up in trouble and costing the county more. Much of what we do falls in the realm of prevention. There's a need to help educate everyone, especially our elected officials, that investment in programs like extension help reduce costs, improves quality of life, and therefore leads to sustainability and success for all. That includes our gardening programs, programs on volunteerism, engaging people. Talk about being cost effective when you put people together to work without paying them. And some other systems might say that's not a good thing to do. Natural resources, critical now in regards to climate change and the impacts of severe storms. Just in the county I work in Tioga County, we've been impacted by 3 floods in the past decade. And we also get involved with community development issues and bringing people together. Talk about natural gas drilling. Currently in Tioga County, talking about transportation. Glad to hear Ithaca has wonderful new sidewalks being built. We have no public transportation in Tioga County, just south of here. We also don't have cell phone services in a number of places. But we're not alone. And in our work, we work with and reach out and work with a number of nonprofit organizations. In Tioga County where I work, our budget hovers around $1 million. Many of the nonprofits in our county are smaller than that. Like most counties, our CAP agencies are usually the largest Goliath in the county. They don't feel that way. They have a lot of pressure. All of us are fighting for funding, going after grants. 4 years ago in Tioga County, we reached out to each other, realized that we're all facing the same fiscal and management challenges. Since Enron, I always say it wrong, what's it called, the Oxy-Sorbane law? No, all nonprofits now have to have their annual audit and added requirements for fiscal oversight, reporting requirements. We go after grants that are often a year at a time, which leads to employment turnover and instability. So we come together in Tioga County, we form the Tioga County Nonprofit Network. I was pleased when we reached out to nonprofit directors and say, hey, are you experiencing the same thing? We're going to get together and talk. For our county, The majority said yes. So the benefit of that has been getting to know each other and what we do. One of the first things that elected officials will say, oh, well, you're all just duplicating and you're doing the same thing. So how do we combat that? We need to get together, talk, learn about each other and what we do, and therefore communicate what we do. And also, as we've seen in many places, people are looking at collective impacts. So how do you do that without coming together and talking about and working on a system to demonstrate what you do, so that way you can articulate what you do, how well you do it, what the impacts are. I think all of our nonprofits have a challenge of trying to articulate what we do. Many of the projects get millions of dollars to create 1 or 2 jobs, when we create jobs every year, but we don't talk about that. We bring in resources, we bring in money from the state, federal government, we bring in money from private foundations to address current needs of our community. If those needs weren't there, we wouldn't be there. So our group in Tioga is continuing to meet and function. One of the biggest things we need to do is get the word out as to who we are and what we do. And our county communication is a problem because we don't have a major community center. Getting the word out across our county is a challenge. But we have the Penny Saver, and there we go. And we have an agreement with them to have an article every couple weeks highlighting the value of one of our members. We are meeting on a regular basis and working toward sharing information on risk management, fiscal management, volunteer management, and those types of things to improve the functioning of our organizations. I've taken the concept to my neighbor county that I work in Chemung County as well, and as an outsider, which even though I've now been working there 10 years, as a director of both Tioga and Chemung Extension, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. We just had our initial meeting, and they too recognized the need to meet and talk and work together. Part of the driving force is how do we do a better job together to meet the needs of our community. And the other benefit for our counties, of course, is that we work with a number of county departments, and we help to address needs of the county. And I think there's more that can be done, not just with Extension, but with other nonprofits, to say, how can we do these things to meet the needs of the community in a way that is more cost effective. Regionally, the food bank of the Southern Tier called a meeting of nonprofit organizations, especially those that serve lower income, to come together. The director of the food bank called it the coalition of the freaked out. She's concerned about impacts of federal cuts, impending federal cuts, and so Natasha brought us together, and that has been a great forum for us to get to know each other, and realizing that many of us have not done a good job of advocating for what the needs are in our community, but also, if we do that, we typically go it alone. So creating this coalition of the leaders of those organizations across the Southern Tier will help to elevate the conversation and to remind the elected officials at the federal level and the state what is really needed to meet the needs of the most vulnerable populations, and articulating what nonprofits do and the importance of those into maintaining the health and well-being of our communities. So with that, and I guess I'm not going to get into the whole taxation thing. I think many of the nonprofits I work with are small. Many of us do rent space from other people, so we pay some taxes. As also to note the difference between how services are paid for, and depending on where you live. You know, I live in a rural hill, and so I do pay for my garbage picked up every week. And so there's differences in how we pay for and get services, and I think the conversation between communities and understanding those differences, and it also speaks to the fact that one size fits all policies and approaches don't work.
Thank you very much, Andy. take a big city at one end of the state, Buffalo, and then two small rural counties, and you see how one of the common themes between both of them is coming together in a network to articulate your interest, and then to figure out who it is you work with or push against to try to get change. Are there questions for Andy? Yes. Hey, darling, you always have questions.
So Andy, do you have like a mission statement, or have you kind of developed any type of strategic plan of what are the key things this coalition is going to work on initially?
In both of these groups, we've done a survey, so we've highlighted the main 3 or 4 things that the group is interested in working on together. Even in Tioga, where we've met now for a couple of years, I still feel it's still getting its legs and getting some leadership. I'm glad this year we had like a leadership team, so it's not just me pushing like, oh, it's time for us to meet again. That there's more thought and actually work happening between. We meet every 2 months, and so there's subcommittees starting to work in between and bringing those things forward. So that's important to do. What I did mention too before I begin, those of you who were here yesterday heard me talk about our poverty coalition in Chemung County and our poverty stoplight work that we're trying to work on. That too is a coalition, as you mentioned, the importance of bringing people together and to first that important getting to know each other and understanding what people do, what can we do together. And in Chemung County, we're really pleased that we're able to move forward the poverty stoplight and actually show change, positive change. And related to that is the importance of looking at things holistically. And I think that's an important thing we need to do with an extension, that we tend to not look at things as holistically as we should, and how this is what we're working on, this is where we're looking to go, where do we put our resources, and how can we make and justify or demonstrate the change over time.
So one of the audience members asked Mayor Minor, what can we do? And this panel has been focused on what we can do, what you can do with your city government, what can you do if you're a coalition of nonprofits pushing for change with your developer or pushing for change with your local government. But there's also a role of what we can do as a citizen. And I think as I sort of set Ron up in a bad way by saying he was going to be pressing, but I think he'll also be telling us what's happening with policy where we as citizens might have an opportunity to push back.
Thank you very much for a wonderful setup. I've been told that after my presentations I should be handing out candy or Xanax. So I don't have either for you, and I apologize for that. But the Fiscal Policy is a kind of an economic think tank. I like to think of myself more as the tank than the think in that situation. I tend to be the one to go out and do the presentations and talk to folks and get out of the Albany bubble. That 2 square blocks surrounded by reality, as we like to affectionately dub it. But I wanted to start my conversation off with and kind of frame it with 2 quotes. I haven't, unlike Mayor Minor, I haven't met Joe Biden, but Joe Biden said one time, don't tell me what your values are, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what your values are. And I thought that was an instructive quote, and it's important. And the other quote is from my grandma, my Italian grandmother, who this quote usually came with a smack to the back of my head. But she said, La merda scende in discesa, which loosely translated is feces rolls downhill, basically. And, unfortunately, local governments seem to be at the bottom of the hill, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So let me start by talking about the fact that we are looking at a La Merda storm, if you will, coming from Washington. If it's to be believed, what's in the House budget resolution, what President Trump has proposed in terms of budget, what the Senate is now looking at and kind of fast-tracking their own resolutions on the budget, we are looking at cuts to the magnitude that we've never seen before, quite frankly, and that we are ill-prepared to deal with at the state level right now. So when you think about, our state budget, our all-funds budget, is about $160 billion a year. So how much of that comes from the federal government? You think 10%, 20%, 33%. Okay, I'll end the suspense. It's 33%. So about $54 billion of our state budget comes from the federal government right now. And a lot of that, $34 billion, is Medicaid. Another $3.75 billion is for Medicaid expansion, right? We covered 674,000 people in New York through that expansion program alone. So it's very important, these federal dollars. And it's not just our state budget that gets federal money, right? Our cities, towns, and villages in upstate New York, outside of New York City, get about 8.3% of their funding from the federal government. School districts outside of New York City get about 4.1%. So we get a total of about $70 billion in federal funds. So what we're seeing right now, though, is a number of proposals that would have a detrimental impact on our state budget. And we know when our state budget takes a whack, right, we tighten our belts, or we something's going on. All right, okay.
Battery may.
I'm pretty loud anyway. So, you know, when our state budget takes a whack, basically that translates into local governments taking a hit too. Because, you know, when the governor talks about tightening his belt and that counties and local governments should do the same, basically what he's been doing is you know, basically tightening his belt around the necks of counties, towns, and villages as a way to reduce costs to the state. So again, we keep pushing more costs down to the local level. But let's look at some of the things that are happening at the federal level, right? We have that Cassidy-Graham bill, right? That could have cost New York over the next decade. Estimates ranged from $33 billion to $50